So my name is Liam Curtis, and I'm one of the speaker events directors for Y Fashion House. I want to welcome you all to our special Earth Day talk on sustainable fashion with Brie Seferian. It is an honor to be included in Earth Week and to be co-sponsored by the Office of Sustainability. Sustainability in fashion has been something we have thought about a lot within our organization this year. So we're excited to continue that ongoing dialogue with Brie tonight. I'm thrilled to announce Brie Seferian, a fellow Yale, finishing up at the School of Management right up the street to you all tonight. Before I fully introduce, I want to just thank a few people. I want to thank Ale, president, one of our co-presidents, for connecting me with Brie, my fashion house, my events team, Lauren, Madison, and Tara, as well as Scott and Ashley from the Office of Sustainability and Brie. So after introducing Brie, I'm going to moderate a discussion with Brie that will last around 40 to 45 minutes, and we're going to open up for an audience Q&A portion at the end of the talk. So feel free to type comments and questions in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the moderated discussion. So let me introduce Brie Seferian. Brie Seferian is a fashion designer currently working on her Executive MBA in sustainability at the Yale School of Management. She studied acting at the University of Connecticut, graduating summa cum laude with honors before moving to New York to be a working actor and theater producer. During that time, her day job was designing at Liz Claiborne, which turned into a career. She's now a senior designer at a major American department store, where she's in charge of all women's swim and outerwear, as well as a niche sportswear line. Her passion for sustainability has brought her to Yale, so she can help redesign the fashion system from the inside out and bring more sustainable options out of the luxury space and into the mainstream. In our special Earth Day conversation tonight, we'll be discussing her design career, sustainability within the fashion industry, and the future of fashion. So I just kind of gave a third person introduction to you, but I want to hear from you. Can you tell us more about your journey to where you are now, career-wise, a senior designer at a major US department store, as well as an executive MBA student at Yale School of Management? Want to take it off, Brie?
Thank you for having me, Liam. Happy Earth Day, everyone. This is a very cool way to spend it, I think. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for hosting. Yeah, my route here was pretty roundabout, as you described. So I started off in acting, and I actually, as a kid, wanted to be a fashion designer, but thought I couldn't because I couldn't draw. So why then acting was the next runner-up, I'm not sure. But ironically, then it ended up being my day job, but I was the assistant technical designer, which means somebody else designed the product, but then I was the one who actually input the specs, the measurements, how to make it, all of that kind of stuff into the system. And then eventually I learned how to draw in the system because it's all done computerized now anyway. Hardly anyone draws by hand anymore. And then I was laughing as I was thinking about this earlier today because I recently upgraded myself to a Wacom tablet. So now I do draw with a pen. But it all comes around. So I guess I'm supposed to be here. It was my day job and now it's full time. I love it. I love design. But a couple of years ago, I was getting really frustrated with the waste that I kept seeing in the industry and doing what I could to get around it and to minimize what I was doing and what I was contributing to, but there's only so much control one person has. So I was looking around trying to figure out what else I could do. And I ended up, I wasn't looking for an MBA program. I was looking for some sort of sustainability program. And when I came across the Yale program that is an MBA in sustainability, it was just, it all sort of clicked, that learning the language of business and figuring out how to utilize that to pull the levers I needed and to convince the powers that be to do the things that I knew needed to be done just seemed to make a lot of sense and seemed to be the way that I would be able to actually achieve something in the industry. So I graduate next month. It's very exciting.
That's very exciting. And an interesting time to be, a student in business, like at a business school right now, just because the landscape is changing so much. So you're talking about you're feeling the need kind of from the top down to fix a lot of sustainability issues in the industry. So what do you identify as some of the greatest barriers to improve sustainability in the fashion industry? Why do you believe that many traditional realtors, designers, or department stores why are they still reluctant to adopt sustainable recommendations, even though like we know this is a problem? Maybe they are reluctant, but also why aren't they like prioritizing sustainable business practices when like it's known that this is not only is it not environmentally sustainable, but it's not financially sustainable to continue these practices. What do you identify, like why?
Well, first of all, I mean, it being Earth Week, there have been like an avalanche of commitments, new sustainability targets and goals. And then this morning, Biden announced the new goals for the United States for sustainability, that they want to cut the GHG emissions by half by the end of the decade, which is very, very ambitious, which is awesome. So I do think that a lot of that's going to have to change, just because in order to get there, everyone has to get on board. But I would say the biggest impediment that I see is data, because you can't improve what you don't measure. You need to know where you're starting from before you can figure out how to get there. And there's just so much data to be collected and to be put into a, I mean, it sounds silly, but to put into a database, like that's, the information is coming from so many different places, and the supply chain is so long. You need to collect data from mills and from factories and from audits, and it's just a really, really big thing to approach. And I feel like until there is some sort of pressure put on companies, it's just easy to sort of ignore. So the easy stuff to go after, companies already do go after and have been for years. The efficiency things, LED lighting and trying to send things by more efficient shipping routes and things like that, because it actually saves the company money. So that's the low hanging fruit that you go after first. But there's a big shift lately where it's not just corporate sustainability anymore or ESG. It's shifting from that efficiency thing to ethical.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the big thing that needs to be cracked open in the next couple of years is how do we create a system that is equitable, just, it's not just climate, it's not just planet, it's also people. It's, you have to sort of pull it all together into a completely new system.
Yeah, so it kind of seems you're describing that we really need to consider the externalities of the fashion industry, the ins and the outs. And it seems like you're describing a broader system. And this framework kind of sounds similar to what I've come to understand as system thinking. So this is describing a practice of identifying and considering all the interrelated and interdependent parts of an entity when you're attacking and approaching a problem. So can you tell us more about systems thinking and how it relates to the fashion industry? And how can we use systems thinking to further our goals for sustainability in fashion?
Yeah, absolutely. So systems thinking is exactly that, where everything is connected. It's all interlinked. So it's like gears. So you can push on different gears and get frustrated that one's not, one's doing something you didn't want it to do, or you can figure out which gear to pull that moves the whole system in the direction that you want it to go. So it can seem really daunting to look at the entire system altogether, but it can also mean that once you figure out those levers to pull and those gears to start moving, then the whole system can change. And hopefully you make an even bigger difference than doing sort of one at a time. So right now, the process of our industry is a straight line. You take things out of the earth, cotton, petroleum, labor, turn them into clothing, ship them around the globe, sell them, wear them, and then throw them away. And then you start all over again. So the whole system really sprang up bit by bit over the last several decades. If you go back to like the 40s, 50s, and people just didn't buy as many clothes, or they made them themselves, or you had to buy the fabric in one place and take it somewhere else that somebody would sew it for you. So this whole system is actually pretty new. And then the fact that it's so global is within my lifetime. Liz Claiborne actually started a lot of that outsourcing overseas in the 90s. So it's pretty recent, and a lot of it was organized around the lowest cost. So sometimes speed takes priority, which is even worse because then you air it, put it on an airplane. Sometimes quality is the highest, but then that's luxury, which is almost a completely separate system. So what I'm talking about is the mass market to mid-tier, which is what most of us wear. So I work at JCPenney, so it's definitely at the opposite end of the spectrum from luxury, but it's what most people actually wear. So you can attack all of that problem by problem. You can grow cotton in a more sustainable way. You can switch to recycled polyester and nylon, make sure your factories are paying a fair wage. And that's the kind of thing that I feel like a lot of companies are already doing. Responsible sourcing. We have, for instance, JCPenney has a very robust responsible sourcing organization. Transport, store design, renewable energy sources, we're LEED certified. We get green energy score every year because we own a lot of our own stores, but that's like whack-a-mole. You're sort of taking care of one thing at a time. And what I would prefer to do is look at the whole system. And this is the systems thinking that's becoming sort of the way that everyone's starting to look at it, is that it's the whole business system. You have to relook at the entire thing. So part of it, that's where you get ThreadUp. So creating a whole new resale market. That's not changing the system, but that's changing the culture around the system and making it okay and acceptable and kind of cool that you can buy and sell your clothing and you don't have to just get rid of it or give it away. And then you start to get more things like Nike refurbished, Levi's secondhand. The companies are all starting to do it themselves. But then the extreme end of it is cradle to cradle. So an architect named Donna came up with the idea where you're really looking at the entire thing from where it starts through its entire life cycle and then back to cradle, so that all of those inputs don't just become outputs and you put them back in the ground. You actually put them back into the system. Okay. And so they score you on like how easy it is to take it apart at the end of its life and recycle those components, or have you somehow blended it and now you can't take those component parts again. So I several years ago, I thought it was brilliant when H&M started taking back any clothes, that they put those bins in the corner of the store and you could bring back anything you wanted to donate it, because the clothing recycling infrastructure really doesn't exist yet. It's starting to now, but you can't know what kind of recycling infrastructure to build out until you know what people are going to bring into the store. Are they going to bring you a lot of rigid denim that's super easy to recycle because it's cotton? Or are they going to bring you a bunch of polyester blouses that need to be like melted down? Or are they blend? You have to start having those inputs in order to experiment with them and figure out what you can do with that. It's probably filling up warehouses by now, but now H&M is starting to come out with, they have a machine in one of their, I think their flagship. They have a machine that anything you bring in, they will shred it, recycle it, knit it into a new sweater for you. Like you can watch it happen. It takes hours. You probably have to like come and do it, go shopping and come back. But they're trying to figure out how you can do it sort of item to item. But then to my point earlier about now things are becoming about ethics, they then just got into tons of hot water over sourcing cotton in Shenyang and how they messaged it and all of that. So it's like messy. The zeitgeist has moved beyond them again already. So, it's closing the loop too, because then you have to train designers to design that way in the first place. You have to train people for what happens when you bring all of that stuff back. It's really remaking the system from the inside out. So like, I used to think that the most, that the easiest way to fix the system would be to nearshore it, like bring all that stuff back home, make it closer. You don't have to ship it, all of that kind of stuff. But then you've got millions of workers all around the globe where the system is already in place. This already is their livelihood. Like taking that away is not a good answer either. So that's where you have to really start thinking about the equity. Gender and racial equity in the industry, both stateside and overseas, is a huge problem. It's just, the more you start talking about it, the more it just needs to be, the whole conversation needs to be integrated into one. Like everyone needs to be empowered to affect change when they see room for improvement. And it's a big job.
Yeah, I think your emphasis on like the ethical side of it, not just like, oh, is this economically efficient? Is this like, getting the highest return is incredibly important. I think it's also something that consumers want to see as well. I think in terms of sustainability, people want to align their sustainability goals with their, consumer behaviors, but also like the decisions ethically that the corporations that they're supporting are making. So I think like thinking in a business framework as also a really great strategy and a way to maximize the impact of sustainability. So you're kind of offering some different solutions and to some of our consumption patterns that are just frankly unsustainable and wasteful. And so replacing slow fashion with fast fashion is frequently offered up to be one of the most sustainable choices that we as fashion consumers can make. But in my view, this recommendation frames sustainability or sustainable and ethical fashion as something that consumers must buy into. And unfortunately, many fashion consumers are totally priced out of buying garments from ethical brands. A lot of them, I think, are in the luxury market, or in smaller brands in regional cities. So how can we shift this relationship between brands and consumers with sustainable fashion? And beyond reducing consumption of fast fashion, what are other ways that consumers can best align their personal sustainability goals with their own patterns of consumption?
I'm glad you said that because, yeah, I agree. That's one of the frustrating things was when I was first looking around for sort of sustainability, you know, industry examples and things to follow and research. And a lot of it was just at the higher end where, I mean,
Yeah.
Stella McCartney is wonderful and we need
Mm-hmm.
her to design her spider silk dresses and,
Yeah.
mushroom leather athleisure, but, I can't afford it. So,
Mm-hmm.
and especially at some of those luxury brands as well. I mean, like 2/3 of American women are plus sized and
Mm-hmm.
they don't even come in those sizes. So even if they do have the money, they can't wear it. So making it accessible and making sustainability just um, a given, it's not a luxury, it's just part of how we do things, I think is absolutely crucial. So I mean, part of it is we have to just buy less, so that does allow you to a certain degree, if you're not buying 3 blouses, you're only buying one, then in theory you can, afford to spend a little bit more on it. But it's buying ethically where you can, trying not to go for things that feel particularly wasteful, but buying vintage and renting and reusing, learning how to sew so that you can fix things. But no amount of recycling it will make up for overconsumption in the first place. So, but I
Mm-hmm.
would say that my biggest recommendation for all of you guys is you're all about to enter the workforce in the next couple of years. And so it's not just about your personal habits of consumption, it's also what you do everywhere in life. So I would say, yes, I work in the fashion industry, so I have control over a certain amount of this stuff. But as an individual designer, I feel like I've probably made a bigger difference sustainability wise with the things I've done at work, trying to reduce the sample rate and reduce the
Mm-hmm.
amount of yardage I ask for and things like that, than I ever could with my own personal consumption. So when you guys enter the workforce and you see some weird legacy system that seems super wasteful, like ask why, question it,
Yeah.
see what you can do, like push some of that stuff, because there's a lot of things that we all do in all industries that just don't make sense anymore. We just
Yeah.
do it that way because we've always done it that way. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to take a new generation of people coming into the workforce and saying, why do we do that? Like, that's just silly, to start moving some of that stuff and changing the way we do everything, not just our
Mm-hmm.
consumption patterns. Like you guys you can have you can have a big difference wherever you go. So just question everything. And then as consumers push for change, like companies listen, we definitely
Mm-hmm.
listen to our consumers, to the comments on the website, to comments in
Yeah.
social
What's
media.
trending on Twitter? Yeah.
Totally, totally. And I mean, shareholder pressure too is a big deal. There's a big shift happening there in business in general. So, but as consumers, you are listened to as well. You're not just screaming into the void. There's people listening on the other end.
Yeah. And politically, is there anything that consumers can demand? Or are there regulations that you feel like need to be made, specific to the fashion industry? I'm kind of just throwing that at you, but
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in works right now. I know there was a lot of pressure a little while ago on Biden to appoint a fashion czar, because there are so many fashion companies that are headquartered in the United States. So to look at that very specifically and come up with some recommendations. Um, so I don't think that went anywhere, but now that he's got this new big goal, I do think there's going to have to be a lot more looked at that way, in terms of what I would love the most is to, and companies are not going to like this idea, but in the EU, there's a lot of regulations over consumer goods companies have to own the full lifespan of their thing. So they have to agree to either take it back at the end of its life and deal with it, recycle it or whatever, or they have to pay for the municipal recycling pickup and all of that kind of stuff. So it makes them more responsible to, like, how long is this going to last? Is someone going to have to throw this away? Like, what's going into it? Can I recycle it? Because the more you make a company responsible for those things, the more it has to enter into the way they think about it in the first place.
yeah,
Before they can
it
figure
sounds
out, like,
similar to like carbon dividends.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
like putting a price to that externality, because there is a cost, but
but who's
and
paying?
eventually we're gonna have to pay it. But
Exactly. usually the people doing the thing in the first place are not the ones that are paying for it down the line. So the more you can, connect those two things, the less people will continue to make those sort of mistakes in the first place.
Yeah, and kind of circling back to what you were saying earlier about the lack of data in the industry. I feel like so many in the past 20 years, so many industries have become digitized, whether that's like healthcare or I know specifically has benefited from digitization organization. But why is there a lack of data? Do you think like we don't know what metrics to use? Do you think that the fashion industry and the supply chains are just incredibly disorganized and not coordinated? I'm also kind of
Part of it's just a coordination thing.
yeah.
It's everyone measures something different. So are you measuring water wastage? Are you measuring greenhouse gas equivalency, or are you measuring carbon? Or, even just something as simple as, is it measured in pounds versus tons versus yards versus garments? So then once you gather all that data to try and put it all together into equivalencies to each other is very difficult. But I think we're starting to get to the point where, so there's two reporting institutions, the GRI and the and SASB, and they recently started getting together because there were a lot of complaints about like, why do we have to do both? And it's similar but not the same, so it's not like you could just copy it over or whatever. And they've started working together to try and integrate that. Like there's a big push industry-wide, worldwide, to try and get everybody sort of on the same page so that it's easier. Everyone's collecting the same metrics. If the mill has to report out to Target this way, they're reporting the same way to Macy's and JCPenney. And, they're not having to do the same work over and over again. So that's shifting a lot. So I do think there's going to be a big movement towards that in the future. And then there's a lot coming out too with like blockchain and things like that.
And it's a lot of innovation in supply chain. I'm wondering too, it seems some of the things you're describing are innovations in material sciences and such. How, as a designer, another question for you. How are scientists and engineers involved in the process of sustainability, and at least your like day-to-day life?
In my day-to-day, not so much.
But how do you see them
further down the stream? So they would be more involved in the lab and with the mills and up front. But it all trickles down. I mean, we need a lot of that. We need the data, but we need the scientists and the engineers and everybody to figure it out. One of the really exciting things right now too, and this is again way upstream from where I am on a day-to-day basis, is regenerative agriculture. So figuring out ways, all right, when you do switch from polyester to cotton, but cotton uses tons of water and lots of fertilizer and everything. So how do you make that process better? You sort of keep going down that whack-a-mole road. And so there's certain things like hemp is so much better for the soil and so much better for the air. So what things can you switch, or what processes can you switch to when you're farming itself that actually sequesters carbon instead of releasing carbon? So then the whole system can become carbon negative, which would be.
And like another question I'm just throwing at you. Do you think that like, how do we get consumers to kind of fall in love with these new materials like hemp? And I think a lot of that may be a reason on like demand side why consumers may be reluctant. They just are not sure how to incorporate these aesthetics, or maybe potential or new dyes or new tones. How do you see that? How do we get consumers excited? And
well, that is where design comes in. So that's one of the kind of exciting things, because you don't want to, market some super sustainable thing. Like I've seen marketing research where they say that sustainable brings up this mind of like scratchy hemp or some like patchouli, hippie kind of thing, but that's not what it is anymore. So then you need people to experiment with new things that you can do with it. So like the biggest thing that's happening with hemp right now is there's a new process to cottonize it, which actually makes it feel more like cotton, so that it's more what a consumer might recognize, and or they blend it with cotton in jeans. So you get the good properties of hemp because it's super wicking, it's antibacterial, it's very, very strong. But then when you blend it with cotton, it feels more like what the consumer is expecting a jean to feel like. So, but I think the onus is on designers to make it something that someone wants to actually put on their body. And then it's also on us as well to market it in a way that doesn't keep someone from trying it in the first place, but you don't hide that it's there either. Because the
I
whole
see.
idea is you have to shift everyone's perception. So you can't just like sneak it in and pretend it's not there. You need someone to know like, oh, I am wearing hemp and it does feel nice. And so this is an okay thing now. So there's a lot of innovation going on, but yeah, the messaging of it is just as important.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it kind of just overnight happen with um, meatless options.
Right.
Like now we see McDonald's, Burger King, basically every major fast food place has meatless meat right now, and they've just seamlessly integrated it into their menus, and they're popular. People are buying it. So I'd love to see, and I think it could happen in the fashion industry as well, if sustainability is not kind of siloed into this niche aesthetic, and it's just more we make sustainability cool. Um, and not just a trend as well, because I feel like if it's just like a passing aesthetic, um it's not that's not how I think on the demand side we make sustainable fashion a long lasting trend or a long lasting
Yeah,
thing.
it can't just be its own little niche that stays that way. It's got to just get pushed through the entire industry. It's just the way we do things. I think it has to eventually it has to become something we're not even calling out anymore, because everyone just assumes it's there.
Hmm. And in terms of looking at the long term, are there some like materials or fabrics that you think are just unreformable, unchangeable that we should just like not use anymore? Like, what are things that you're like, we just need to stop this? Is there anything that you think is
For
so wasteful?
for
Fur? Yeah.
yeah, I people go back and forth about leather, but by and large, it is a byproduct of
Mm-hmm.
the cow, and then there's a lot of things about the leather tanning process that are super horrible, but that
Mm-hmm.
can be done better. There are better ways to do that, but
Is that a
we're
more
not eating the
chemical
meat,
thing?
you know.
Yeah.
So I have a hard time seeing the redeemable value in fur, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think that's caught on. A lot of major luxury brands have kind of sworn off of doing it
Yeah.
anymore. I know in New York, I think they banned for sale. And I see that very much as more tied to animal rights, but it comes with, a benefit of increased sustainability.
Yeah,
If
it's got a big footprint.
yeah. um, uh, so yeah, I'm in New Haven right now. You're somewhere remotely, and as you told me, you're finishing up your executive MBA right now, focusing on sustainability. And these sustainable business degrees, which I've seen referred to as green MBAs, they've really grown in prominence, as the consequences. Climate change have become unignorable, and as corporations and governments are really starting to respond to calls for sustainability. So, what is it like being an MBA student right now? How does going back to school, at this stage in your career tie back into your design work? And in this environmental management degree, when assessing growth, how do you balance promoting business growth while limiting the cost of heedless consumerism?
Well, I'm definitely in the right place at the right time. I mean, over
Yeah.
the last 2 years, there's been a huge shift in the way that sustainability is discussed in the business world. Stakeholder capitalism, um, green bonds, carbon sequestration, carbon credits, all of that
Mhm.
they used to be really like fringy ideas, and now they're totally mainstream, gaining a lot of momentum, especially in the investor community. I saw something, I think it was yesterday, maybe it was today, that Swiss Re, one of the really, really big insurance companies in Europe, um, had done this enormous risk assessment and said that if we don't deal with climate change, there's going to be something like a $50 trillion hit to the worldwide economy. And then they broke it out by country. Like this country will
Wow.
be half as good off economically as they would have been if they didn't deal with it.
Money
So
talks.
money talks, and risk is that's something that I didn't really grasp before business school, was how risk enters into the actual financial equations. So
Mhm.
risk is something that finance people pay a lot of attention to, and risk is what is starting to, like, everyone can feel it, starting to creep up. So there's a big shift in the way that everybody's talking about value and how do you capture value and what is valuable. I mean, it's like that word itself is a whole class of discussion. But I feel like businesses haven't been sitting back for the last 2 years. They're starting to be sort of the leading edge of a lot of this stuff. I know Chip Bergh, the CEO of Levi's, got a lot of heat for being really outspoken, and he clapped back today and was like, "It's my job. I'm a CEO of a major company. I have to be aware of this stuff, and I have to have a position. I can't just stay silent and do nothing." So certainly on my day-to-day in design, it hasn't changed that much, other than it changes how I read the newspapers. It changes how I view sort of what my company is doing and what that macro environment is. But on a day-to-day basis, I mean, designing clothing is still sort of the same process. But it's definitely opened doors that otherwise would be closed, just because my coworkers all know what I'm doing. They know that I'm into this. So now I'm on the product sustainability committee. I'm getting more involved just because people know it's my passion. So um, there's a tension between that growth ethos that you were talking about and the idea of sustainability, but it doesn't just mean sustainability for the environment, like we were saying before. It's sustainability of the entire thing. It's sustainability of the world and ourselves and the business, and all of that risk is something that needs to be taken into consideration. So I don't think it's not a clash anymore. Now it's just a matter of figuring out how to capture those externalities, price it in, figure it out. What is the long-term plan versus the short-term plan? And with Biden's announcement today, like, there's going to be a lot of pressure on everybody to really step up. So it's a really exciting time, actually.
But yeah, he's really made climate, dealing with the climate crisis his kind of signature policy,
Yeah.
in every sector, every domain. So that must be incredibly, yeah, it's just incredibly exciting for for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to get into, or kind of restate why you kind of decided to go back, and kind of do this degree while still continuing to work at this stage of your career? Like, what value did you see in it, and how do you feel about your experience so far, especially considering how it has been remote?
The remote part's been disappointing, but it has also been really cool. I've been able to take some classes, like electives, that I otherwise wouldn't be able to because I'm a distance student. The Executive MBA program, we don't live in New Haven. We all have jobs. We live somewhere else, and we come in every other weekend for class all day Friday and Saturday.
Oh,
So the program itself is built around people who are a little later stage career, and they assume you're going to continue to work the entire time. So when I first looked for a graduate degree, I was looking for one that I could continue to work, because I'm married, I have 3 kids, I have a mortgage, stopping all that for 2 years and paying for school at the same time just isn't really going to be an option. But the program has turned out to be amazing. And of course, the quality of teaching didn't go down at all when we went remote. We just missed each other, the class,
Yeah,
our cohort, and the bonding in the hallways and stuff. So that's the part that we've missed. But we did get a year together first, so we were pretty
yeah,
bonded over this whole experience. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do professionally with it when I got out. I thought it was a possibility I was going to completely shift and leave the fashion industry, but um, the more that I've studied, the more I view everything through the lens of the industry I know best. Of course, I know the fashion industry, and that's where I get excited about things like, oh, we could do that, you could do that, and this would be so cool. And so I get excited about some of the other things too, but it always for me comes back to the fashion industry. So I do think that I will continue to push from within. It seems like the best way to accomplish something, to be honest. Um, and I don't
and
think that it
di-
necessarily means, being a sustainability person where that's my full-time job, but I think sustainability needs to start entering everyone's job. Every
yeah.
single one of us. Anything you do has to have that lens applied to it.
So can you kind of describe the concentration sustainability, and what that is? Did you know about that coming in? Is that a new thing?
I was looking for a sustainability degree. I didn't know what that
Okay.
meant. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. The MBA program is an MBA first and foremost. So
Yeah.
most of my classes have been core, econ, accounting, finance. But then we had a big chunk in the fall semester of our second year that was just pure in our track. So there's also healthcare majors
hmm
and asset management majors. So it's not really a major, but sort of the
The
equivalent
concentration. Yeah.
concentration. So then we had specific classes. So we had social entrepreneurship class and sustainable finance, which completely blew my mind. So that was all of the green bonds and that kind of just fascinating to me. Like, how do you finance some massive infrastructure project like a huge solar installation or something like that? Was just fascinating to see how those deals get put together, and how, you know, the bond system works and all of that kind of stuff. And then we had a climate change class taught by a law professor, Doug Kaiser, that was just amazing. It really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I hadn't really thought about prior, even though it was something that I was really interested in. So it's really been an incredible experience.
Wow. And kind of do you feel like the way, you know, sustainability fits in it, is it seems still like it's kind of this peripheral thing, or do you think it's just like a lens that now that all businesses must look through?
I think it's becoming just a lens,
Yeah,
everything to look through.
yeah.
Like, we kept telling our other classmates, like, you have to be in this class, like, you need this information too. And actually some of our asset management classmates sort of audited, even though they were in other classes at the same time, they would like watch the lectures later because they wanted the information as well. Like, I think it's going to become just more of it's something everybody needs to study, and it's a way that everybody needs to think. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really the vision. So my last question before we open up to the audience is that, do you have any personal recommendations for, you know, sustainable practices that we can implement in our lives, or brands or lines that we should check out to align ourselves with sustainability, or just generally other actionable things that we can do today or tomorrow, and kind of just, you know, as an individuals and members of communities, like promote sustainability.
Yeah, and there's so one that I found the other day, Tonle is a zero waste company. They use only dead stock from other fashion companies. Um, Very cool. Misha Nanu, she's on the more expensive range, not quite to the Stella McCartney end, but she holds no inventory. So everything you order gets made on demand. So you have to wait a couple of weeks, but there's no waste in her keeping inventory. So there's a website called Good on You that I check out pretty frequently, because they analyze companies and sort of give them a sustainability rating. And there's new little tiny companies popping up all the time. So it's cool to check out. But and then Alden Wicker is a fashion journalist who has a website called Eco Cult, and she does like deep dives on things. So she'll read some statistic and she'll be like, really, I want to know why, and she'll just do a deep dive on a specific part, and she focuses on the fashion industry. So she's got some really interesting stuff out there. But I mean, honestly, the most sustainable thing you own is probably that like ratty t-shirt you never throw away that you wear to bed now because you outgrew it or whatever. Like, the longer you can hang on to things, the more sustainable it is over the lifetime of it. You know,
See.
wash it in cold water, hang it up to dry. A lot of those like little daily habits, I mean, they sound annoying, but it's absolutely true. Like, over the course of your lifetime, that's what actually makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think we just totally need to like rethink how we both buy and like just treat our garments.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just gonna, Good on You. It seems like a really great resource. So I'm just gonna drop it in the chat for everyone. And at this point of the talk, we're just gonna open up for audience questions. So feel free to write stuff in the chat, and you can unmute yourself, or I can read your question. You can turn your camera on, but we'd love to make this super interactive. So please ask up anything. Just drop it in the chat and we'll. Hi, Alicia. Do you have a question?
You're muted, Alyssa.
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Hi, Brie. Congratulations on your degree.
Thank you.
So exciting. And I missed first 15 minutes of the meeting, so sorry if you already went over it. So is there, do you, because I was, Brie was my co-worker for many years,
Oh,
and
wow.
I recently exited fashion industry. So, so I wanted to ask for an update. Do you think there any like micro shifts in the retail giants that me and you have worked with for past decades?
Yes, there are for sure. Maybe micro at the moment, but building to macro. Yeah, for sure. Like nothing I'm allowed to say out loud right now, but I did talk to corporate before I did this.
we had to clear it.
But in your studies, did you have to do any case studies on big retailers at all?
We read a lot of cases. We did a case on Zara. Because my program isn't fashion specific, we didn't have we just did one on the Real, which is also very interesting to me, of like figuring out how that whole resale thing works. But
did they just have an IPO, or was that another?
That is my 2-year-old in the background.
Yeah. But yeah, the Real. I think like some of what you were talking about how secondhand, both like secondhand e-commerce sites are growing, but also that retailers are starting their own. I think that's one of like the most like the biggest space for growth, in the industry. The Real, like they had an IPO I think 2 years ago, which is really impressive to me.
Yeah. And that's where I wish that there were more data, because we sort of assume some of this stuff, or they come up with their own data. And I would love to look at the actual raw data of like, okay, so all that shipping back and forth and the plastic bags that you're putting it in when you do that, and then all of the dry cleaning every single time, like, does it add up to being the same in the long run, or does it end up being like amazingly less? Because we did do one case in our sustainable operations class that was comparing using petroleum-based polyester versus a corn-based polyester, but you had to grow the corn in the US and then ship it to a mill in China and then ship it back. And it turned out to be better to use a petroleum-based one when you looked at like the GHG equivalent, because of all of that shipping back and forth. And so like I was trying to look at, for work, the difference between organic cotton or recycled cotton, because again, same thing, we collect people's old jeans in the United States, and then it gets shipped to a mill in China and then shipped back. And I was like, does it end up being the same? But no one had done a study on it. I couldn't find reliable data of what the carbon footprint of organic cotton versus recycled cotton when you're like, I was even trying to find like the address of the mills and the address of the recycling company. And it's hard to track some of that data down. And that's where, to your earlier question, Liam, like we need scientists and researchers and professors to be studying some of this stuff, because we need the data to back it up, because you don't want to make a decision that sounds logical in your mind, but then when you look at the actual data, it was the wrong decision.
That's interesting. That's interesting that once you look at the bigger picture, sometimes it's the reverse. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, but it's also probably so true that once you make companies more responsible and enforce it financially, that's where the real work begins.
Right.
Because I mean, just enthusiasm unfortunately doesn't move people fast enough.
Yeah,
it gets them there eventually, but it takes a long time. Yeah.
And just like, slowly integrating it in our closet. So like just the aesthetics that we are drawn to just become sustainable in themselves. And it's not like some trend or I'm trying to look earthy and like it's just, how we dress ourselves and how we express ourselves and show our connection to the earth and our environment implicitly.
Yeah. And I wonder if the thread up or the secondhand option would also coexist within the department stores. If people would gravitate towards it just from affordability and convenience, because, you know, maybe you don't want to go to a separate store to do thrift shopping, but if it's right in front of you and you're saving money, a lot of people would opt out. And if you also get rewards or perks by turning your stuff into the vintage, that you don't dump it with, like with Goodwill, it's like furniture and housewares and everything, you know, it's a kitchen sink. But if it's a department store, you know, and you're just bringing clothes and you coming out with clothes back, then it will be more convenient for consumers, I think.
Yeah,
I think you talked about that in the beginning. Yeah, do you want to talk about that again?
I was actually just going to suggest that two of the things I found while we were on COVID lockdowns that do recycling in the mail for textiles is Marine Layer. Will take t-shirts, and then, you know, they give you a coupon towards new t-shirts using the recycled cotton from the t-shirts. And then For Days is a similar kind of idea, but they will take anything basically. Like Marine Layer, I think it had to just be t-shirts, but For Days will take almost anything. And so they send you a little bag in the mail, and then you ship it back kind of the same way ThredUp works, except they'll do whatever they can with it. So they'll resell it or donate it if it's still wearable, but if it's not, then they'll recycle the textiles as well and turn it into new clothes, which I think is a really cool, because the more frictionless you can make it for people, the more likely they are.
Yeah.
So if the little baggie shows up in their mailbox and they just have to fill it and send it back, like, it's so easy.
But yeah, I think that's a really great idea. Alisa is how you pronounce your name?
Yeah.
Yeah, and just in terms of both, you know, making consumers, you know, be more thoughtful and treat their clothes better, as well as just developing a more long-term relationship with brands, having like some sort of program where like you could trade something in if it's up to a certain quality, or maybe you can trade two things and get a new dress or something. Like in terms of developing a long-term relationship with a brand, I think that's like a great strategy to do that.
Yeah, I was reading about the new Nike refurbished program where they'll take back old Nikes and then they'll try to resell them or, you know, refurbish them if necessary, that kind of stuff. But they don't have that built in, where like you get a coupon for a new pair of Nikes or something like that. So I was like, I think they're missing that. So many other places offer that. So
Eileen Fisher, I don't know if you mentioned that too in the beginning. Yeah, that's a great program. You know, if you're brand loyal, then it's great that you can just exchange your stuff essentially.
Yeah, I see another question from Ayotunde. So I'm just going to, let me let you.
Hi. So I'm on the move, so I'm going to leave my camera off at the moment.
No
but it's really, really cool to be here. And I just want to say congratulations to Brie, you know, graduating pretty soon. You guys don't know, but Brie and my husband are in the same class, so they'll be graduating in a few weeks' time. And Brie has been really awesome in just, you know, helping me work on a project of my own. I just wanted to chip into the data question. And I don't know if you know Alabama Channing. She's this fashion designer based in Alabama. And when she first started out, she worked with recycled t-shirts and she makes these beautiful, beautiful clothes for women. And over time, she evolved into sort of working and collaborating with the cotton industry in Alabama. And, you know, using the organic cottons, creating these wonderful jersey textiles. So now she does a lot more of that sort of work. So you might plug into that and see her history. She's built this wonderful, wonderful organization based on just that ethos of recycling and, you know, specifically cotton. So you might get something there. And then I just wondered regarding the sort of processes, could you talk a little bit more about sort of the small batch production, and if larger companies like yours are considering that in some way in their operations, what it looks like, and maybe on the other hand, how practical is small batch production for smaller fashion houses, starting up? Is there a role? Is there room for that model of maybe more, many small batch productions, many companies like that, rather than huge one big company producing so much, that sort of thing? So just a little bit more on that, please, Brie.
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of what drives the cost of the more sustainable, smaller companies is they don't have those efficiencies of scale. So big company like JCPenney were in very large factories overseas. I know at times in the past when we wanted to do like Made in America capsule, and we told various factories or mills in the United States what the units were that we needed, they were like, oh yeah, that's like our entire production for the whole year. And that was for one order. Like they just didn't have the capacity to take an order from us, irregardless of cost. So it was just a capacity issue at that time. I mean, I don't know what the situation would be now. So we're in this weird sort of step where I know, for instance, I designed for a small brand called Bold Elements, and it's not in all doors. It's a niche thing. It's not one of the big brands at JCPenney. And sometimes we have a hard time because JCPenney uses these massive factories overseas, and then our orders comparatively are tiny, and they don't want to take them, or they charge us more because it's like annoying for them. So then you have to jump down to a smaller factory that is probably not overseas. It's probably here or it's closer, but they're not going to have the same production efficiencies. And so your price starts to creep back up.
Yes.
But those are the trade-offs that you make, so that's part of the kind of the nut that we need to crack is figuring out what those different levels of the system look like and making sure that the quality doesn't suffer, the people's livelihoods don't suffer, that, everyone is being treated fairly and equitably at all steps of the process and all places around the world, that it's not just more expensive because it's made in the US because we happen to pay more, but that everyone is being paid, a fair wage for their work around the world would help bring everything into equilibrium in that sense. But small batch just tends to be more expensive. It doesn't mean it has to be. Certainly, especially if you can get to a point where that's reducing the waste, it's reducing the lead times too. If you've got really skilled sewers who can take on a project that they're able to sort of pivot and take whatever the order is that came in today, and then you're not carrying inventory, like that helps balance out the cost on the other end.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks so
You're
much
welcome.
for asking that thoughtful question. I had a question that Madison asked, just more kind of lifestyle and advice that she sent me. So Madison asked just kind of some tips for how you balance your life with your work, how you find time to focus and be in the right headspace for work, and just general advice for current students interested in going to sustainable fashion.
Okay. I've got a lot going on because I have 3 kids, and and now with working from home because of COVID, it all happens in grad school, it all happens in the same place. I would say when I first started grad school, one of the things that was kind of exciting to me was that I figured out how to focus. Like I was fully present with my kids, I was fully present at work, and then I was fully present at night when I was doing my homework. And now that it's all in one place, that's become much, much harder. But you just kind of do it. So but you do have to sort of set aside time to be creative. That is one thing that I feel like is a challenge for everybody, and that's in any career, but fashion, it's just part and parcel of the job is making sure that you set aside, is there, a whole morning without a meeting that you just block everything off and you literally can't turn on the computer, you can't check your email, because once you do that, you sort of go down that other rabbit hole. But making sure that there's some quiet time somewhere to just think or not think and let your mind drift is really important for, I think, anybody at this point. Not sure if that answered the question, but
No, yeah, it totally does, because I feel like it's just there's so many distractions and it's really hard to kind of segregate a lot of different aspects of our life. So anything that helps us find concentration and peace, which I think is a fertile ground for creativity, and it's really helpful and insightful. Yeah, and do you have just any general advice for students who want to go into the fashion industry, or maybe specifically sustainable fashion in general?
Just follow your passion. I think go for whatever excites you the most. If it makes you scared, it's probably a good thing. And with sustainability, and this again, it's especially applicable for the fashion industry, but for any career you go into, that you can bring sustainability wherever you go. I had there was like a roundtable lunch thing that was sponsored by the Women in Management Club a couple weeks ago, that we got to have lunch with like the head of sustainability at McDonald's and the head of sustainability at a bank and all of these other different places. And all of them pretty much said the same thing, that early in their careers, they were just sort of that person who was constantly like, I'm into sustainability, put me on that, or, you know, just pushing it all the time, like make yourself annoying. And eventually like people start being like, oh, that sustainability girl, like give her that project because she says she likes it, you know. But that's how it happens. Anything, whether it's sustainability or anything else, is like when you're into something, just don't be quiet about it. Don't wait for someone else to give it to you and figure it out on their own, that that's something you want to do. Like you have to just put yourself out there and say, this is what I'm passionate about, and I would like to do that, and just drive at it.
Yeah, be a trailblazer.
Totally.
So yeah, thank you so much. I think we're gonna wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and just sharing yourself, your life, your work with all of us. And I want to thank the audience as well for engaging and adding such thoughtful questions. So happy Earth Day, everyone, and I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Yeah, take care. Bye.
Good night.